Hi everyone, my name is Lois Skillings and I'm the president of Midcoast Hospital in Brunswick, Maine, and I'm so excited to be with you today as part of the United Way of Midcoast Maine's Community Read Aloud. I wish we were together in person. I really love coming to your school to read every year, and this year though we'll be doing this by video because we know that with the pandemic it's safer for us to stay apart sometimes and to do things by video. So today I would like to read to you one of my favorite books called Finding the Green Stone. And Alice Walker is one of my favorite writers of all times. And she wrote this book way back a long time ago, but it's still relevant today. So it's such a beautiful book with paintings by Catherine Dieter, and it's called Finding the Green Stone. So it starts right at this very time. In a small community on the earth live a brother and a sister who have identical, iridescent green stones. The stones shine brightly and are small enough to fit into their hands. The children prize their stones and often play with them, taking them out of their pockets and holding them up to the sun, putting them in clear water of the seaside among the rocks and plucking them out again, and so on. They are very happy with their stones. And you can see the children playing by the seaside with their stones. I like the seagull here too. But one day, Johnny, the brother, lost his green stone. He looked everywhere for it. And you can see his face. He's so worried that he's lost it. Then he looked at his sister Katie's green stone, and because his own stone was missing, he imagined that hers looked bigger and shinier than ever. He thought maybe his green stone had disappeared into hers. "You've stolen my green stone," he said. "No way," said Katie. Johnny frowned at her and tried to grab her green stone, and even the memory of his own stone vanished. As the days passed, Johnny became very dull and sat for hours under the big tree in the center of the community. But Katie never forgot that Johnny had once possessed his very own brightly glowing green stone exactly like hers. And every day, while he sat under the tree fuming and casting mean looks at everybody who passed, and sometimes muttering nasty things as well, she brought him her green stone to hold and reminded him that he had once had one too. So you can see here Johnny is sitting under the tree and he's very sad, but his sister is worried about him. You can tell because he's missing his green stone. At first, Johnny liked to play with Katie's stone because whenever he did so, he felt much better. But then he'd remember that it was hers and that he didn't have one of his own, and he'd become angry. One day, when Johnny was feeling this way, he tried to steal Katie's stone by pretending it was his. "This is my stone," he said, clutching it in his fist, not intending to give it back. "Not yours." But as soon as he did that, the stone turned gray in his hand, just like the rocks by the ocean. And when he looked over at Katie again, she had her green stone as bright and shining as ever. Johnny felt sad, and he realized that stealing somebody else's green stone would never make it his. Besides, it was lonely under the big tree, and trying to look mean all day was boring. One day, he mustered the courage to talk about his change of heart to Katie, who rarely talked to him now because she was afraid. "I will never try to steal your green stone again," he said to her, "but I miss my own stone so much. Will you help me find it?" At first, Katie didn't know what to do. How could she believe what Johnny meant when he said that he wouldn't try to grab her green stone again? "No," she said after a long pause, "I can't help you." Johnny's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Katie could see that he meant her no harm, but something inside her liked being the powerful one for a change. "No," she said again, sticking out her chest, just as she'd seen Johnny do. But when she did that and said no the second time with coldness in her heart, her own green stone began to flicker and almost stopped shining. Katie glanced at Johnny's sweet, sad face, so like her own, and then at her flickering green stone. Being spiteful to her brother would just never work. "I love you, Johnny," she said quietly. I'm happiest when you have your very own green stone, and I will do everything I can do to help you to find it." The radiance of her stone when she said this and reached for Johnny's hand dazzled them both. You can see how bright and shiny the stone is when they're both holding it together. Johnny and Katie set out on their search, hearts pounding, hands in hand. They looked near Mr. Old Roseharp's house. "I'm afraid to go up to the porch," said Johnny. "Last week when Mr. Roseharp came by the big tree on his way to the store, I called him a bad name." But old Mr. Roseharp had seen them coming, and he stood on his porch in his long red nightshirt and a big yellow broom in his hand. He lived alone in a little wooden house painted blue, and all over it there were painted flowers. In some places you couldn't tell where his flower garden ended and his house began. Old Mr. Roseharp looked down at Johnny and Katie expectantly. Can you see old Mr. Roseharp here? Old Mr. Roseharp has a kitty in the window and a doggie on the porch too. Katie gave Johnny a nudge in the ribs to help him to speak up. She could see that Mr. Roseharp was more sad than angry because of what Johnny had said. "Since I called you a bad name," said Johnny, "I lost my green stone." "Oh no," said old Mr. Roseharp, who knew what a tragedy that was. He immediately tucked his nightshirt into his pants and pulled down his broom, and shaking his head with concern and saying, "Oh, oh, oh," and he came down to where Katie and Johnny stood and began right there in his own yard to help them look. So you can see Mr. Roseharp's hand here is helping them look for the green stone. You see Johnny and Katie. And then there's also this really cute, tiny little white mouse. I love that part on this page. Next, they went to the woods where Johnny and Kate's father was busy loading a big pulpwood truck using a noisy machine to lift up the cut-up pieces of the trees. He turned it off when he saw them coming. Again, Johnny hung back. At this time, he kicked the ground with his toe. "What's the matter?" asked Katie. "Last week I told Daddy I was ashamed of him for being the driver of a stupid pulpwood truck. I hurt his feelings, and I don't know how to tell him I'm sorry." But Johnny's father, Mr. Oakes, looked into Johnny's eyes and saw how sad they were. "What's wrong, son?" he said gently, folding Johnny into his large arms. For some reason, being held in his father's arms made Johnny cry and cry. "I'm so sorry for what I said to you about driving the pulpwood truck," he said through his tears. "I know it's the only way you can make a living and that you can help Mama feed and clothe us all." And you can see Johnny and his dad hugging here in the big red pulpwood truck. And Mr. Roseharp and Katie are over here next to the big trees. "Hey, I knew you didn't mean it," said his father. "I knew you only said it because you hate what pulpwooding does to trees. I know, I hate that too. And since I said it," said Johnny, "I've lost my green stone." Mr. Oakes whistled in dismay. He'd lost his own stone many times in his life, and each time he'd felt terrible. He hugged Johnny and kissed him firmly on the forehead. And when Johnny and Katie and old Mr. Roseharp turned away, Mr. Oakes followed them in his truck. Mr. Oakes wore his stone on a thong around his neck. Katie made an earring of hers, and old Mr. Roseharp wore his on his hat. As they moved along, their stones sparkled and shone. I like this picture because it has a little chipmunk in it too. So you're starting to understand that everybody in this community has their own little green stone. Soon Katie and Johnny saw their mother coming. Since she was the only doctor in their little community, she was always dressed for work and moving very fast. She was wearing a white pantsuit and carrying her black doctor's bag. Her green stone was an especially beautiful one, and because she was always in a hurry and changed clothes so often, she carried it for safekeeping in her cheek, which made her look like a mother squirrel carrying a large nut. When she saw everyone coming, she took it out of her cheek and closed her hand around it. It shone so brightly that her fist seemed to have a green light in it. "What's the matter? What's the matter?" their mother asked, kissing Mr. Oakes and Katie and Johnny. She stood tapping her foot as she waited for their reply. Both Katie and Johnny wondered if they should tell her. Their mother was always in such a hurry that telling her things of importance sometimes felt like throwing your heart against the wind. She would cluck over you for about a minute, and then she'd run off to tend to somebody who really needed attention. Johnny had complained to her about this just last week, about how she was never around like the other children's mothers and how she never got hugs and cookies and milk when he came home from school, and he wanted another mother entirely from the one he had told her. And you can see Dr. Oakes right here with her greenstone in her hand. Still, with Katie's warm little fingers urging him on, Johnny said, "It's nothing much," he said. "She's probably on her way to deliver a baby, for heaven's sake. It's just that I lost my greenstone." "You what?" said his mother, dropping her bag, something he'd never seen her do. Johnny thought that his mother knew almost everything, even if she was usually too busy to say so. "Do you know where it might be?" she asked. "Do you have it?" "I can't keep up with every little single thing, Johnny," said his mother in a voice that sounded like she was tired of trying. "Maybe if you do a better job of cleaning up your room, you wouldn't need help finding your stuff. And no, I do not have your green stone. I have my own." She picked up her bag, looked at her watch, and placed her own green stone back on her cheek. It tasted like copper. So she spat it out and looked at it, and it looked like a small, sickly olive. "Uh-oh," she said. Then she put her arm around Johnny's shoulder. "Listen, son, everybody has his or own green stone. You ought to know that by now. Nobody can give it to you, and nobody can take it away. Only you can misplace or lose it. If you've lost it, it's your own fault." Johnny felt sadder than he'd ever felt in his life. He thought about his beautiful green stone and how he would probably never see it again, and how his mother, whom he loved and would never wish to replace with another mother, always spoke so impatiently. He knew she would not have time to help him look, but without his mother's help, they had no chance at all, Johnny felt. To his surprise, however, his mother took his hand and said, in her fast, leaping over the gate post voice, "We will get everybody in the community to help you look for your green stone anyway." And so she smiled over at Mr. Oakes as if seeing him for the first time, even though she'd already kissed him, and he smiled back at her, and they all set off down the road. So look at this whole community starting to come together to help Johnny find his stone. Before Johnny knew it, he and Katie, Mr. and Dr. Oakes, old Mr. Roseharp were being followed by Miss Rivers, Johnny and Katie's teacher, Mr. Skies, the minister, Mr. Birdfield, the shoeshine man, Sonny, the paper boy, and all their classmates and friends also came along. There was even a baby crawling after them. Its own glowing green stone was the handle of its pacifier. The dog that was its guardian walked beside it, a green stone glistening in its collar. Johnny felt embarrassed that all these people knew he'd lost his green stone, but Katie went back and picked up the baby, who was almost as large as she was, and then held on to her brother's hand. Johnny looked at his sister's hopeful face and at the baby, who seemed so happy to be out strolling with the big people, and he tried to keep his chin up for their sakes. Look at all these people. Isn't that fun? And they all have their own green stone. Finally, after hours and hours of searching, under doorstops, in orchards and flower beds, and even on the cliff, everyone was tired, and so they stopped to rest under the big tree. The tree's green stone was one of its millions of fat green leaves. Sometimes it was hard to see, but not today. Today it sparkled brightly, way up high above everybody's head, and this made Johnny sadder still. Tears came to his eyes. He was not crying because he'd lost the stone. He knew that because of his hurtful behavior, he deserved to lose it. He was crying because all these people, and especially Katie, loved him and were trying to help him find his green stone, even though they knew perfectly well that he could only find it for himself. See them all resting around the tree, and there's Katie helping her brother. Idly, Johnny picked up a small rock and fondled it. He was puzzled that everyone in his community wanted to help him do something he could only do himself, and in his puzzlement, he began to feel as if a giant bee were buzzing in his chest. It felt exactly as if all the warmth inside himself was trying to rush out to all the people around him, and he noticed that as soon as that warmth was inside him, touched him, that they all began to shine. "You should all go home," he said to Katie, "ashamed to have taken up so much of everybody's time. You've wasted a whole afternoon. There's no point in helping me look for something that you can't actually help me find. "We wanted to be with you when you found it," said Katie softly, wiping Johnny's tears away with her sleeve. And sure enough, when Johnny followed Katie's gaze and looked down at his hand, what did he see? Not the dull and lifeless rock that he thought he was holding, but his very own bright green stone. Johnny jumped up and began to dance around the tree, and all the people, his mother and father, old Mr. Roseharp, his teacher and minister, and the shoeshine man, and the paperboy, and Katie, all returned the smile that he gave them. They welcomed the rising of a bright green sun in his heart, which they knew was Johnny's love for them, and its warm light overflowing the small brown fingers clutched close to his chest. Look at all those happy people, and especially Johnny. And I love this picture here too, because it shows the tree and all the people in the community all around it. And then this looks like it's taken from outer space. So that's the end of Finding the Green Stone by Alice Walker. Thank you for sharing the story with me today. Take care.